We've talked a lot about big data and the data business today, and we've come at it from many different angles, primarily marketing in terms of how do we use all this newfound data that we have to better target, to drive business objectives. And today, for this last panel, we'll take a look ahead, look at some of the opportunities and also some of the pitfalls before big data can truly become mainstream and adopted more widely. So first I'm going to start off having the panels introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Corbin. I work for Adobe. We have a few analytics products that we sell out there. And prior to joining Adobe, I worked for a ad agency called Wonderman for a few years and worked for Unica before that.
Hi, my name is Malene Fuentes. I am the analytics lead for Thrillist Media Group, which is a mixture of content as well as e-commerce.
Ben Green, I work for Pearson. We do direct consumer sales of personal and professional technology learning products. Prior to joining Pearson, I worked in politics for John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, Department of Defense, and things like that, my own agency.
I'm Dustin Whitney. I'm the CTO of Trust Metrics. We do quality analysis for different sites for ad networks, DSPs primarily.
Hi, I'm Alex Schleider, and I focus on the data and analytics for a company called Videology. We run a lot of in-stream video advertising for large brands across online video, connected television, and mobile. So we really support the overall efforts in terms of measuring and understanding the value of those branded advertisements against any type of back-end measurements.
Great, thanks. So, this morning, or actually throughout the day, we kept talking about the differences between traditional and digital, and how the metrics that we're dealing with are also fundamentally different. So in traditional channels, we're dealing typically with metrics that deal with the size of the audience, versus digital, which is very much more measurable, and those metrics are based on the actions of the users themselves. And how do we start to reconcile traditional versus digital? We heard about some of the challenges in getting both the brands, the clients, to really bridge that gap. If they're coming from traditional and they're used to putting out the message themselves in a one-way channel, now how do you correlate that back to digital metrics in the two-way channel? So maybe we can start with just kind of examples from your own experience, how we're able to bridge that gap, or just maybe a case study of how a client that you've served has done that.
Sure. So I've had an opportunity to work with a number of large brands across multiple verticals, and we've done some pretty interesting stuff with people in the retail vertical around people who are going online to shop, looking at products there, and then converting offline brick and mortar. And obviously, trying to figure out what do they do, how do we identify them on our site, and then identify them in the store is somewhat of a challenge. So pushing things like customer loyalty programs, getting people to sign up, giving them a value proposition. $5 off if you come into our store and buy this right now. Something that's been really successful with some of the big brands that we've worked with, in terms of identifying them online and tracking their conversions offline.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Sure. I mean, kind of bringing together traditional and now digital, working with the brand advertising. Thinking about linear TV to begin with, a lot of measurements were done against GRPs and TRPs and those same metrics. I think Nielsen was up here earlier today, and ComScore. They're all talking about it now as the ability to measure gross rating points and what that means for a brand advertiser, and how the packaged good industry and auto industries buy media against those metrics. And so, that is one way that we're seeing the convergence of the two mediums coming together is the ability to measure frequency and audience and unique reach. But then, taking it one step forward in the digital world, you have the ability to really dive into the individual user, which I think is why we're here today. Talk about what data means and tracking and connecting the dots between someone who's exposed to an ad compared to somebody who actually purchases in the offline world. Those things are happening today.
I would add, when you're in the traditional space, you know what you're buying. It's easy to determine the quality of like the magazine or the television program you're going to buy on. So what we do is we give the marketer the confidence that they're going to see the content that they want, just like they would in a publication.
A lot of marketers in the direct-to-consumer space are challenged by or aided a lot by the mega sites like an Amazon or even a Target, where you can't compete so much on price. But if you're able to harness the data that you see coming from multiple channels and create a unique offering on your venue, you can achieve an advantage and achieve measurable lift and a high degree of loyalty from the consumer who sees that unique value that you're providing based on your use of data.
Yeah, I think that actually what you just honed in on was really understanding the user from a channel perspective and really understanding the different mediums and the different platforms that we have helps you then create the view that you need to then understand your business and the differences between the different users to actually then be able to not only target them properly, but then to actually really understand the different usage of your product itself.
So I think that those are all great answers, but the challenge is like, how do you identify those users across multiple channels? So you have mobile, you have the fixed web, you have the brick and mortar. Like, how are we identifying those across all of those different channels? That's the challenge.
So let me jump right in terms of the privacy issue. So that was a perfect lead into, if we now have to start identifying these users across channels, what data, is too much data? Like, what is the user willing to contribute? So maybe we can talk about different approaches on addressing the privacy issue. We heard some of those approaches earlier, but the privacy issue was never really dealt with head-on. So let's do it.
I mean, in addressing the privacy issues, obviously there's lots of rules and legislation you need to follow. I mean, our company, we don't touch any PII. We work with a lot of third-party vendors and third-party data providers. That's their main purpose, and that's what they do. They work with some loyalty cards, offline registration, online registration, and it's their responsibility as we work with them and sync up to make sure that everything's anonymous when it comes into our platform. And obviously the ability for users to be able to opt out, and all the ad choices that are happening today in terms of giving consumers more awareness about what targeted advertising means. I mean, I think those are the things of how we're addressing privacy today.
So you're just pushing it off to a third party?
Well, I mean, that's their responsibility. They're the ones who are working at the lower levels in terms of gathering data, and we do rely on them. Now, if it's a first party user, first-party advertiser who's surfacing their data, then it's their data to surface it, and obviously, again, following the same guidelines, making sure that we're not touching any privacy, PII.
So are we just talking about a unique identifier for the individual where you don't have access to their name and address per se, but it's still a unique identifier that then you want to target?
I would call it an identifier, and yes, it is an identifier that there's really just attributions tied to it, and we have no ability to tie it back to any personally identifiable information. But it just allows us to basically understand who that audience is in terms of an attribution, whether they're a male, age, gender, what type of behavioral behavioral attributes are applied to it. But that's as far as it goes.
I think you really hit it on the head in terms of keeping it within context, and where I've seen particularly when I was working in politics, people trying to push the envelope on privacy issues, running into problems, is where you're taking things out of context and speaking to audiences with no relevancy to what the prior contact was with that audience. So you run into problems in that, and where I've seen success is in keeping things contextual, keeping things within the audience's expectations. What can the audience reasonably expect given the rules of engagement that they were given when they first made that contact, which then a second or third party is turning around and contacting them again.
So kind of echoing the comments from this morning, people like to be personalized to, but they don't like to be targeted, right? So if they can get some kind of value out of it, that's one way of addressing it. Any other perspectives on how to handle the privacy issue?
I mean, you know, if you're talking about privacy for data, you know, there's different aspects of data that you can consider. So there's privacy for tracking, right? And tracking is helping to create the data. So I think there was a large company who was doing some tracking on Apple products recently. And you know, obviously, like, that's something that people didn't appreciate. It's an invasion of privacy, right? Because they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing. So I think, you know, in terms of privacy, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and letting people know that, people are okay with that.
And also giving them a chance to opt out, or in fact, a chance to opt in would be the better way, right? Anybody notice that on Pinterest, when you sign up, they actually friend and follow, you know, 274 of my friends without telling me, and then they send out a notice to all of them. So ever wonder why their traffic is going through the roof? So that was not cool with me, right? Because they didn't pre-check that with me and let me allow that. So. All right.
I want to just interrupt.
Yeah.
I don't need a microphone, but I will use one if I can get one. Privacy. I don't want to cover this yet. I don't want to like just gloss over it because I want to challenge you guys a little bit because I had to deal with privacy in the world, not in America. And the world's a very different place for privacy than naive Americans would think it would be, right? Because y'all, for example, Alec, we just met today.
Yes.
I believe you when you say that you guys do it for attribution and you don't tie it. But you said you don't have the ability, and I don't believe that. And I'm not challenging you, right? Because you do have the ability. Because if you're collecting an identifier for attribution, you're tying it to a person. And if you set that, spooky local shared object, registry entry, there's so many ways. Dustin knows to track people on the internet. That
well, you just said you're not going to challenge me, but yet you're challenging me.
Well, that's what people say. You know what I mean? I'm not going to throw you under the bus, and then they throw you under the bus. That's what happens in board meetings all the time. So I'm not really challenging. I'm just saying that the dialogue needs to elevate to the point where, yeah, all these companies that we're talking to can track you down, and they know how many kids you have, and they can tie with ChoicePoint, Experian, TransUnion, right? They can join all this data. And I work for Reed Elsevier. We ran analytics for Reed Elsevier, right? It's a big company. You do this, and you get the EU after you, right, in Europe, right? The EU cookie policy, it's being driven out of OID in the UK. Not Germany, right? But you can't have Google Analytics in Germany. It's going to be illegal. But, you know, again, Alec, I'm picking on you a little bit. It's not Alec, it was just the point. They don't do it now. They can do it in the future. Read about Operation Echelon. Now, I'm not a crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm probably like FBI, CIA, NSA is like after me now because I mentioned Operation Echelon, right? Read about it. This is just capitalism on top of Operation Echelon. What's going on in Syria? What went on in Arab Spring, right? If we don't control privacy in America, right, all of us, because we're the ones setting the dialogue, the government's going to control it. And then we're no different than Syria. That's why SOPA was wrong. That's why PIPA was wrong. That's why Larry and Sergey came out of wherever they live, right, and went on the air. We were like, Larry and Sergey, they're so cool, man. They're my age, and they're worth $22 billion. They must be right, and they are right. So look at what Google's doing with privacy. Look at what European companies are doing with privacy, because that's going to come marching on our shores. Or at some point, they're all going to kick out your front door, just like in that movie, Brazil. I don't mean to sound too scary, but the privacy thing, we're not talking about it enough, okay? And every one of these companies can tie it back to you, whether it's hitting a kiss, Mr. James at Domo, right? Mr. Rencher at Adobe, Mr. Lee at IBM, Mr. Squire at Core Metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with you. I mean,
I know you don't.
You're saying that we can tie it back, but the reality is we can't because
you can't. Again, I'm not
no one in the organization can. And
no, that's not true.
Well, I mean, I think that the way that we work with our our providers, and maybe this is, I don't think this conversation's about privacy, this panel is, but we certainly can address it because you've made a pretty big statement just now.
I did.
Right, is that as long as we follow and we work with the reputable firms and companies, and everyone is following the laws as we do, then we have no ability to tie it back to an individual.
I believe that you don't.
Okay,
I believe
so I just
have.
want to make sure that's clear because you said otherwise. And
Okay,
and that's,
I
a big
believe
statement.
that you can't. I believe that you can't.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
But I don't believe that you know your technology as well as your engineers. So we're not going to continue to argue, okay? But I think you have excellent technology. I'm not insulting it at all. But I want to make sure that we don't just gloss over privacy, right? Because that is what we're going to talk about this year in America. And if we're not, it's next year. Or you know what? We're not going to be talking about anything in America because we don't have any privacy. That's my rant. Thanks, Alex, for letting me pick on you just a little bit.
I mean, I think personally in the U.S. that if we are giving consumers choice, that's a good thing. And we're educating them and giving them the opportunity to opt out and creating legislation and the right things in place to make it better for consumers. And also to continue to drive the value of what this digital environment can give.
True. Opt out, right? Or opt in. Like, any company that opts me into anything does not have my business. Pinterest, I don't need like a virtual note board for stuff. I have Facebook for that. No offense to Pinterest. I mean, it's just my personal opinion. A lot of fellow friends like it. It's cool. Opting me in, auto-tweeting, just let me opt in, right? I don't want to opt out. Let me opt in. Right?
So I guess
that's
the way we can leave it is just letting the user opt out going to be sufficient, for big data to really catch hold? Are we going to see an outcry from consumers, just like we did with SOPA and PIPA, to really drive the conversation in the consumer's favor? Because if they're not going to do it, no one else is going to be on their side, right? We as marketers want all the data we can get, right? So is that going to be the ultimate course that we take? But we haven't really talked about scenarios where the consumers opt in. So, for example, on Foursquare, they check in to get a special, right? They want to self-declare that they're here or wherever they're going. So, what about that? If they opt in, they self-declare, is that open season for us marketers?
Well, I mean, they're checking in for a reason, It's like they have to have an incentive to check in. Of course, in the early days, they weren't checking in for any reason other than to say, I'm here. And see what other cool people are there. But now with things like Scavenger, there's a few other products out there where people are, they said, hey, I'm here now, give me something for it. And so there's mutual benefit there. So I think they're checking in. That's their acceptance of, hey, you can use my location to send me something that's relevant.
I think you could even take it a step further than that. I mean, you buy a cell phone or you buy a smartphone. And you sign that contract with them, you're assigning them certain rights to use that information about where you are, what you're doing, the information that you're communicating, whether you're cognizant of it or not. That's a pretty big concession on the part of the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, even frequency shopper cards that you guys sign up for, everyone signs up for at a grocery store. Right, that information you're opting in to to be looked at in terms of what you're buying at the grocery store level, so you can get better offers put in front of you that are relevant to you.
That's why I put in all fake data all the time. Anyway, okay, so let's now tie this back to business because we've got all this data and probably coming since you're all here at this conference, we can safely assume that big data is here to stay. We can pretty much collect and track anything and everything that we want going forward, especially if people are doing more and more of their activities through their mobile device. That's a whole new frontier where the rules haven't really been written yet. So assuming that we can track all of this, any other pitfalls that you see or maybe examples of how we're now able to tie this back to more granular business impact?
So I guess the one thing is that with the increase in data that you have and the increase in the ability to do things with your data, you run into the issue of losing sight of what your goal is, what your mission is, and what you should really be focusing on. And big data isn't really a new thing, neither is data science. What we can do with data has gotten a lot more interesting. But at the end of the day, it does come back to what's your strategy, how are you using this data, and how is it really impacting your business?
Great. So paraphrasing, it's not about the data charts, the infographics, or the data porn. It's actually more about the business objectives. I told Jonathan Mendez I'd weave that in. All right. Any other examples? I think, Ben, you had the Pearson example of looking across the online channel to then inform.
Well, I think I spoke to that a little bit earlier, but it's not just, with my work, I can't really get into the details of that, but this is what I see happening across a lot of direct-to-consumer businesses in my networking and my research.
Speak into your mic, please. Sorry to interrupt. Can you speak?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. This is something that I've seen happening not only within my own work for Pearson, but also across many different direct-to-consumer channels, identifying what is the unique value that creates loyalty on the part of the consumer that keeps them coming back. And it's not so much about that one sale that you might be making, but what is the lifetime value of that consumer? And that's where big data kicks in, not to overuse that term. But.
Great, and let me ask the audience to start preparing their questions. I'm going to just use one more retail example. So without naming the brands, this retailer had always sold through their retail partners or the wholesalers. So they were kind of reluctantly, or they've been reluctantly doing e-commerce. But now for the first time, in order to generate their own data and have firsthand experience with the customer, they actually are making a concerted effort to do e-commerce on their site. So that even if that's a sample set, just a small percentage of the overall commerce that they do, for the first time, they'll actually have real-time customer interactions. They'll see what's working and what's not. And some of those insights can then flow back into what they do in their other retail channels, including product selection, demand planning, like how much to manufacture of which. So that's a great example of how one company is now tying together their different channels. So let me open it up to the audience, and then after a few questions, we're going to ask the panelists to do their closing thought in the form of a tweet. Okay? All right. Question over there.
All right, I need to turn that one on. Questions. And if you don't have any questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and ask you.
Question right over here.
All right, a question, and I'm going to make you answer it. You're welcome. Just name.
Angela, again, sorry. A lot of the data that we're getting through all the channels is self-selecting. Just because I go on a Facebook page and like a brand doesn't mean I buy the brand. So how are brands balancing the data against real-world purchasers? Are they looking at other kinds of research and balancing that out against the metrics that they're getting from online, which is, in some ways, its own little world?
I mean, I think that's still very nascent, like we've talked about before. But companies like dunnhumby have, for a long time tried to tie online activities and actions to offline sales. But now, when it comes to social media, I mean, we've just come through, last couple years of big brands doing experimentation. So, they all made the obligatory Facebook page, obligatory Twitter page, and then now they're asking, okay, so what's the business impact? So for the first time, they're asking those questions, and I think that's still yet to come. And it's up to us in the room to really help them build some of those models, whether it's an attribution model, so they can tie that back through the offline space. And that's when we start to run into some of these issues. What is the unique key that ties action in the offline space and actions in the online space if it's not the user's name and address and personal information?
I think it gets to your question about what are the other factors. You got to look at things like emotion, time of day, what's going on perhaps on the calendar at that particular interval at any given point in time. Those things can factor into a consumer's buying decision just as much as, if not more than, whether they like a particular thing on Facebook or whether they've tweeted about something that they've seen or something that's going on in the media. So it's a mix of all of those things that really achieve success.
Were you here when Joel gave his presentation? So he talked about, if he did the slides that we reviewed, he talked about what a director of research at a large CPG company does, right? She sells soap, right? So the kind of conversation that you just asked, that's why I created Arrow. I mean, precisely to have these conversations, because, well, many of us are still trying to figure out, like, what's going on our websites? Many of us have already figured out what's going on our websites. And so now many of us are trying to figure out, how do you merge the digital with the traditional, right? And how do you generate business value off of it? And that's kind of what you were talking about, right? And how do you do that? We're going to talk about an Arrow. But I can tell you that at the highest echelons in the insights and research teams at the largest companies in the world, yeah, they talk about digital. I'm freaked out by it, right? It's new school, it's complex, and you can't really get educated unless you do it. And there's a lot of snake oil people who talk the talk but have never walked the walk in the business, right? We all know that. But that's what Coca-Cola is talking about. That's what Unilever's talking about. That's what Procter & Gamble's talking about. That's what the biggest companies in the world are dealing with. And so that is an excellent question. And then how does social media fit in? I kind of talked about that on the other panel, incremental. Why does Coke have 22 million fans and 50,000 pages but still updates their page? Anybody want to know? Because if you have your privacy settings not set, like I set them on Facebook, Coca-Cola pops up in your status, your little news feed. So the point, it's not about direct response, right? And this is the conversation that I have in these boardrooms. It's about, social's about branding, right? And that's a totally different thing than what the social media gurus are going to tell you. And you look at your traffic, you're like, oh, Twitter sent 54 sites and they didn't do anything. But you had a 10-person social media team. That's the challenge, right? The incrementality of social for selling soap or chemical water, right? What are you going to do? Anyway, I just wanted to make that comment.
All right. Now let's get into some of the closing thoughts. You've had a long day here, but let's talk about just your thoughts looking forward into the future for big data, and let's start from the end of the line, work this way.
I mean, so my thoughts around big data is obviously there's lots out there, and your ability to understand the audience that you want to reach based on your objectives of the campaign, and for an advertiser, what's the objective, what are the KPIs, and what's important when it comes to driving overall results. So one thing I would just say is that where there's always a place for clicks and completion rates and actions, understand that things are happening beyond that, and data and the ability to measure it is going to provide solutions and answers beyond the click. I think that's important.
All right, that's about 16 tweets. All right, thanks. Dustin?
I'll try to be shorter. I guess I agree with what Melaine said, that big data it's nothing new. It really should be the business objectives that drive everything. Under the hood, we're all kind of doing the same thing, so it's that push from the business side that is really important.
And it may take one of these discontinuous events like a market crash to force people to actually focus in on that, because otherwise they're just going to keep doing what they are used to doing.
Externalities?
With the proliferation of data and all the different points that are available to us now, it seems like there's something new every day. And so if I could kind of summarize, it would be that you just have to really, at some point, forget about the jargon and focus on the key to success in analyzing big data being to identify and maintain a clear path to your objectives.
Great, thank you. Elaine?
I think I'd probably go with big data isn't sexy. What's sexy is making really big decisions, and our businesses are now realizing the worth of that.
See, I like that. Like, I don't click on like buttons.
Just you.
But I don't. Probably just me. But I like what Melaine had to say. And you know how I met Melaine? It's a long story, but what impressed me about Melaine is that I met the CFO for a former employer, Huffington Post, and I actually met Ariana at the Compete Summit last year. She knew who Melaine was, but I didn't talk to her for very long. But I did talk to your former boss, and he basically said, like, they couldn't run the business without her, Huffington Post.
Thanks. So I think my closing thought on big data is, before you start bringing all these multiple data sources together, think about what the business value is.
All right, and mine is the right data for the right job. So thank you very much. Thanks, Judah, for co-moderating.
Oh, please, this is what I do. I'm the MC, man. And I would also